Eagles getting ready for the Washington Commanders. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast set to join us right now. Get a little insight on this NFC race. The Eagles back at practice. And Geoff Mosher, let's start at the top. The 21-day window opened for one Bryce Huff. And is, that intrigue you at all here for a guy who did not really make that big of an impact to start the season? And now they could have him potentially for the stretch run here. What do we think about Bryce Huff and his availability potentially for these last three games?
Well, Mike, at very least, Bryce Huff's return gives the Eagles just added depth at the edge rusher position. They've been doing a very good job, especially with Brandon Graham sideline, of getting by and getting enough pass rush out of JoshSweat, out of Nolan Smith, who had an excellent game against the Steelers, and out of Jalix Hunt. But you're talking about 3 more games left, division games. You could have more injuries. And then you're talking about the playoffs. And ideally, you want as many good pass rushers as you can. So even though Bryce Huff has not lived up to the contract, and even though, even when he was healthy, Vic Fangio wasn't playing him the most amount of snaps, Vic's probably going to have to play him some over the stretch here and in the playoffs just to keep legs fresh. And if the guy gives you production, I don't want to call it gravy, Mike, but they have done a very good job without him. But he gives you production that could help you take your defense to yet an even higher level.
Yeah, I mean, he was obviously a disappointment, right? I mean, so I guess one question would be, how much of that disappointment was the injury? How much of that disappointment was not a good fit? None of the above.
Yeah, I mean, he was healthy in training camp. He was healthy, to my knowledge, in September. And we didn't see what we expected to see back then. So I think the adjustment to the scheme, the way they were playing him compared to how the Jets played him, the extra snaps that he had to play. You've heard Vic Fangio talk all year long about how the practices that they've had throughout the season have been longer and have helped the development of several players who are acclimating to his scheme. So for Bryce Huff to, have missed the last 4 weeks and even before that be a little bit banged up and bruised, he just hasn't, his acclimation process has been slow too. So I think that that's more of it than the injury. But if this guy can go out there and give you a couple of pressures and a sack here and there and help you pinch the pocket, then, I hate calling it gravy or bonus, but they're playing so well without him. So it does sort of feel like if he's able to be productive and healthy, then it feels like a bonus as long as nobody else gets hurt.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing. I'm very interested. Do you think he'll play this week?
I don't know. I think with a wrist, it sort of depends on, and again, today was a walkthrough, so he hasn't really had contact against the wrist. I think we'll have to see how the next 2 days go. The good thing about it being a wrist, Mike, is that you can still run on a treadmill. You can still get your conditioning in. Now, your strength may suffer as a result because maybe you don't get the amount of weightlifting and strength training you're in because you have to lay off on your wrist. But I don't think that that's really a big issue at this time of the year for players. I think it's more about conditioning. So we'll have to see how he does with the contact in practice.
Yeah, because obviously they brought in Bryce Huff to, be the main pass rusher on this team. Right now you're almost saying, hey, whatever you can add to this rush would be a big help here. So if they can get anything from Bryce Huff, it would certainly be a big addition to this team down the stretch they come there. I want to get your thoughts on the defense because a lot of people asking, all right, here we are, 15 weeks in, got 3 teams at 12-2. Is it the Eagles' defense for you, Geoff Mosher, that separates them from the other contenders?
Man, it's funny. You asked me, I may give you a different question depending on the week and the game that the Eagles just played. As great as the defense played against the Steelers, and they absolutely did, I don't know how many teams can run a 21-play drive and drain 10.5 minutes off of a clock the way the Eagles did at the end of that game. So you have to sort of tip your cap to how efficient they were offensively and on third down and how balanced they were in that game. But you are correct in saying the offense has been inconsistent outside of the running game. The pass offense has been inconsistent throughout the year, whereas the defense has consistently been very, very good week in and week out. And that's what makes this team, Mike, what you just said, one of the 3 teams that has 12 wins right now is that they have that much talent and that many different ways to be able to beat you. But it is a fair assessment to say that from week in and week out, their defense has been the most consistent part of their team success.
Right. I mean, it's almost like you're looking at what Detroit did, even with all of the injuries, that they have just absolutely, like, their biggest problem, I guess, is the injuries. But their defense was still a question even kind of getting to this stage of the season. Is Minnesota, in your mind, more of a threat now?
I think they have to be, Mike, and again, it sort of depends on the question you ask. Like they're 12-2. If they've got some pretty tough games here, I think, down the stretch. Right, they have to play the Lions, and do they have another one against the Packers or no? I forget.
Minnesota plays the Packers next week, and then they play the Lions at the last game of the season. This week they're at Seattle.
Right. So lose 2 out of those 3 games, and then we're probably back to saying, yeah, we knew Minnesota wasn't for real, or Sam Darnold couldn't be the guy to win that many games, but win 2 out of those 3. And then we're going to say, hey, the Vikings are legit. They're a threat. I'll go as far to say this. This Vikings team, to me, is far more impressive than the one a couple of years ago. Was it 2 years ago that made the playoffs and lost to the Giants in the first round? That Vikings team, if you remember, had a scratch and claw, had all these fourth quarter comebacks, and it was sort of a nice story, but not nearly as talented as this Vikings team. This Vikings defense is great. The defensive coordinator is great. The wide receivers are great. 2 years ago, they didn't have Jordan Addison. They just had basically Jefferson, right? Now they got Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, and a better offensive line. So that has put and Sam Darnold in a really good position to have his strengths capitalized on. So do I think that they're the type of team where Darnold can throw a few picks and lose it for you? Yeah, but they've only been that once or twice this year. So I think that you definitely have to respect them as a really good team that can do some things defensively. I do think the Eagles are a better team, though.
Well, isn't that the whole thing here? It's the preconceived notion of who Sam Darnold is and not 100%. Being able to change that notion until he almost beats you.
Yes, and that is 100% the preconceived notion, and it's fair. I mean, it's fair. Listen, people always say to me, I'm glad you bring this up. A lot of people who don't like, what we might say about the offense or JalenHurts or whatever, they say, why don't other quarterbacks get criticized the same way? And I say, they do. We just cover the Eagles, and a lot of people are in their Philadelphia bubble. But do you know how many people in the national media have taken this very, very good Vikings team and said, yeah, but Sam Darnold? So it's, that's the nature of the game. Until you become the elite of the elite year in, year out, win some Super Bowls, like why doesn't Patrick Mahomes get criticized? Because he has 3 Super Bowl rings. So he gets the benefit of the doubt. That's why.
Yeah,
and that's the exact with Sam opposite with Darnold. Until he performs at a really high level in a playoff game and doesn't, turn the ball over and have some kind of bonehead plays, people are going to say, yeah, but Sam Darnold.
So what do they say, yeah, but about JalenHurts now?
Listen, the one difference is JalenHurts in the Super Bowl, right, played like the best quarterback on the field that day. I mean, he was unbelievable. So we have evidence that JalenHurts can perform at a really high level, even if he is inconsistent at times during the season. We have evidence that JalenHurts, even on maybe not his best passing day, will make set outside the pocket plays and running plays that Sam Darnold couldn't make on his greatest day of quarterbacking, athletic quarterbacking, right? That's not who Sam Darnold is. So I would say you have to give JalenHurts a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt in that regard, while you can still be fair and critique his passing game when it's not good at times and say, hey, this could cost him in the playoffs if he's not going to hit open receivers. I don't think it's yeah, but JalenHurts the way it is, yeah, but Sam Darnold.
Yeah, it's funny. These teams right now, you take a look at who's quarterbacking each and every team in the high spots. You got Jared Goff, a guy who's been questioned a lot. Sam Darnold, a guy who's been questioned a lot. And JalenHurts, a guy who is getting the questions a lot here. Then you got Jordan Love. What about the Packers in this race? And what about the Buccaneers in this race?
It'd be very, very interesting if the Eagles and Buccaneers meet up again in the playoffs, even more so than Eagles Packers. I think Eagles Bucs, because of the obvious storyline of every time you face Todd Bowles, he's really stuck it to you. or most of the time. I think there was a one regular season win in there. There might have been, but obviously.
Well, they beat them last year. They beat them down there in Tampa in week 2 last year. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of. But, obviously the Tom Brady year was 2 real ugly losses. And then last year in the playoffs was 2 really ugly losses. So 3 out of 4 is not a good stat as far as losing to the Bucs. So, I think that's an interesting storyline. But certainly I think the entire NFC wild card picture, Mike, is fascinating because if the Lions wind up winning the number 1 seed and winning the NFC North, then you're going to have some double-digit win teams, the Vikings and the Packers, who look every bit as good as the Lions, at least right now with all Lions injuries, right, who are going to be going on the road and probably favored to win on the road against the 3 and the 4 seed, right, against Tampa maybe and against the Rams if it's the Rams that win the NFC South. So, and then the Eagles might have to play one of those teams. So, I think that it's not an easy road to the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl when you're in the NFC.
Yeah, and obviously you take a look at this team getting ready for the Commanders team. It looks like the NFC East is, even if they lose this week, they would have to lose out, and Washington would have to win out for Philadelphia to lose the NFC East. So it looks like they're going to go in as, at worst, the 2 seed here. I think we all think the number 1 seed is important, but how realistic do you think it is?
Well, I mean, the Lions have a pretty tough schedule. Again, they have to play the Vikings, right? They've got the Bears this week, I believe. And then, so it's Bears, somebody Vikings. I forget who that somebody is in between.
San Francisco.
Which is just not great. I don't think it's that realistic because I think the Lions can at least win 2 out of 3 here. And that forces the Eagles to go 3-0. And then even if they do, is that a tie or is it? Well, I guess that would be the case. If the Lions go 2-1, the Eagles go 3-0, the Eagles will get it, right? Because right now it's tied.
Yeah. Because they would end up 1 game better.
Yeah, so it's really not that unrealistic because it's going to come down to that Lions-Vikings game, I think, at the end of the year.
And that's the thing, and that's where most this gets interesting because
because the Vikings could lead. You're right, because then the Vikings might be the number 1 seed.
And in that situation, and the Vikings apparently, if they and Philly finish with the same record, they win the tiebreaker based on strength of victory, which is the 4th tiebreaker.
Yeah. So look, I mean, if you're asking me to handicap it, it's not looking great, but I wouldn't put it out. It's not like both of those teams have easy schedules. I know Seattle's not great, and they really did not play well against the Packers last week, but could they beat the Vikings? Yeah, sure. They could. It's not like Seattle's terrible. They're an 8 or 9 win team right now. So there's some interesting games there.
Well, and the interesting part about this, Moshe, is as you kind of look at this, it almost feels like the Eagles could be going into the last week with 2 losses, and that game might mean something. It might not mean something, and them having to be in limbo of what we do in this last week, depending on the 2 teams. One of them has to lose here, right? So it does make for them to have a pretty interesting final 3-week stretch, especially with the Barkley story going for the record against the Giants, that whole possibility. There's a lot that goes into this here.
Hey, Mike, there's a reason why. Now you're thinking with your suit and tie on. Now you're thinking like the NFL, right? And there's a reason why no week 17 or week 18 game, I guess, has been assigned a time slot yet, correct? Right?
Yeah, they've been doing that the last couple of years. They keep everything's TBD.
Smartest thing the NFL has ever done. They do not want these teams all playing at the same time. They want intrigue. They want it to matter. So the best way to do that is if there's tie to have some teams playing.
Right. A lot of times they play those teams at the same time so they can't scoreboard, or they have to kind of scoreboard watch as the game's going on.
Right. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. And then the team that might get the team that usually has the least shot but is hoping for something will play later. And if that something happens, then you get 44-6 Eagles over the Cowboys 2008 style.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here on the Sports Pass Live 97.3 ESPN. As they get ready for Washington, is there any, the Eagles have been pretty healthy, but they did have a couple interesting, Landon Dickerson left the game the other day. Barkley was kind of weirdly in and out of that game. Is there any thoughts about where they are injury-wise heading into the week?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of intrigue, and I think Nick Sirianni did the right thing today by having a walkthrough and not a tougher practice given all those injuries. Andrew DeCecco reported that basically every single offensive lineman today and during the stretch period was just throwing a medicine ball around, and it looks like none of them were going to practice, and said the same about Devontae Smith and AJBrown. So tomorrow is a big day. You would obviously have concern over Landon Dickerson, although I will say Tyler Steen has filled in well this year. However, he's mostly filled in on the right side and practice on the right side. This past week against the Steelers, he had to play the left side, which is not where he's played, not since college. So that might be a little bit of a difficult adjustment for him. Plus, you're on the road, so noise comes into play. And that's really the one that sort of bears the most watching. Slay, we'll see how he comes. And the pop-up injuries. There's always pop-up injuries that you have to worry about.
LaShawn McCoy, interesting comment by him because he played for Andy Reid and he played for Chip Kelly and had some really good offensive lines. Listen to what he said about this offensive line.
This is the best. Don't get mad at me, all my Kelsey. You know you my favorite. Jason Kelce, you know what I mean? This is the best offensive line I've ever seen. Ever seen in football. Y'all tell me. So they pass block great. They run block great. I mean, they do everything. Because they got size, they got speed, they athletic, they got tackles, they got guards, they got centers. And because they got backups.
They got guards, they got centers, they got tackles, they got backups. I mean, he thinks this is the best offensive line he's ever seen.
Man, that is tough. I still think the 2017 offensive line, and granted, you had no Jason Peters and Big V had to fill in, and Wisniewski was at left guard, so that's not the sexiest, but you had Kelsey, Brandon Brooks, and Lane Johnson. You had, at that time, very inarguably, I think, the number one player at his position at center, right guard, and right tackle. You still have the number one right tackle, and I don't know that you have a number one player at his position. I think Landon Dickerson's pretty close. I liked Cam Jurgens. He's had a great year, but he's not like Frank Ragnow for the Lions, right? I mean, there are a couple other centers who are ahead of him in the pecking order. Jordan Mailata is so underrated, and I have to give him a ton of credit because there were times last year, Mike, that I thought he struggled. I didn't think last year was his best year as opposed to maybe the year they went to the Super Bowl. But this year, the fact that I can't even remember talking about him, which for an offensive line is a great thing, he has played really, really well. Best left tackle in the league. I mean, I think that's still up for debate.
And honestly, Jeff, he went out 4 games. He went out 4 games and they won.
I forgot about that.
Right? Yeah, and that's where McCoy says they got backups. They got backups too.
And they've always had backups. But yeah, there are some offensive line men who are asked to pass block a little more, which is a little tougher at times because the Eagles run the ball a lot. But listen, top 2, top 3, you can put the Eagles there in the league, but I still there's a small place in my heart, man, for the 2017 offensive line.
With Big V and the injury stuff because of that.
Yeah. But
they weren't the most talented.
Right. You went center, right guard, right tackle, elite, all pro, number one in this position at each one.
Well, the other thing is too, Lane Johnson just shows no signs of slowing down.
He does not. And knock on wood here, he stays healthy this time around. Yeah. I mean, the guy was a warrior, played through that adductor tear 2 years ago in the playoffs. And, he has been healthy. He's been really good. And I'll give LaShawn McCoy at this point, and I think that this is really what speaks to it. There's only a couple of teams, Eagles probably, the Lions probably. I don't even know. I haven't watched the Chiefs, but I know their tackles are really struggling. But it's very hard to be able to leave your tackles, both of them, on an island 90% of the game. But the Eagles are one of the few teams that can do it. And that enables you to get all 5 of your outlets, your 3 receivers, your 1 tight end, your running back, or your 2 receivers, 2 tight ends, and a running back. Or if you want to go 5 wide, whatever it is, you can hit all of them because they don't have to stay in to protect.
All right, Moshe, these 2 teams played not too long ago. Jaden Daniels seemed to be a little banged up with the rib problem in that game. McLaurin, 1 catch for 10 yards. Does this game feel different this time around? He seemingly has got a little healthier, and they've played better since that loss. Last week, they could have lost that game to the Saints. But does this game feel that Washington's made up any ground?
I don't know, Mike. It certainly can be a closer game, and could Washington win? Yes, but I don't feel that the Eagles are any less of a better team this week than the last time they played them. Now, of course, the injuries, as you were mentioning, could play a huge role depending on who resurfaces and who's out of this game. But Washington's dealing with some tough ones too. And we'll see if their center, Tyler Biadasz, is able to play. He got sick, I think, right before the game and couldn't play last week. And when you lose your center, you almost lose everything. And you saw that Washington was able to score a couple points early, like 14 early, and then they got shut down the rest of the way against the Saints team. That's not that great. So injury there. Noah Brown, who was a pretty good number 2/3 receiver for them, I believe is hurt. Zach Ertz suffered a concussion. So if he can't play, that is obviously a important piece of their offense. Austin Eckler, Mike, who ripped up the Eagles over the interior, like 8 catches, 89 yards. He's not going to play. So if anything, you might say Washington's a little bit worse. Even if Daniels is feeling better from a personnel standpoint, they might be a little bit worse off than the last time they played.
Well, they got a lot to play for, too. The Rams are on their heels, and, of course, that game happens in Washington this weekend, the Eagles and the Commanders, and you can listen to it right here on 97.3 ESPN. This is Football at 4. Geoff Mosher is off next Wednesday for Christmas. I will talk to you Monday. We'll have a Monday with Mosher, my final one of the year. I'm off the rest of the year after Monday, but Geoff Mosher, I will see you then.
Happy holidays, Mike. Take care.